Public theologian Dr. Craig Heilmann joins me on the program now. Craig, kia ora, thanks for your time.
Kia ora, Andrew. Great to see you again, mate.
This is a controversial move, and to be fair, the Anglican Church, I mean, since they started back in Henry VIII's day, they've been causing a little bit of controversy. This may cause a massive split between Western nations and perhaps the more conservative African Anglican churches. What are we talking here, Craig?
I think, all the old notes are being played. You've got the issues around sexuality, which the new Archbishop Sarah Mullally is involved with. She was involved in drafting a report called Living in Love and Faith, which was about the church's position on homosexual marriage, etc. Now, that the church hasn't sort of shifted its position. What it's done is said, we will bless same-sex unions that the state has forged. And if you read that document, the Anglicans are doing what the Anglicans have always done. When I was in my academic life, we were taught that when you study something, you find two types of people. We call them splitters and lumpers. Splitters are people who look for really fine distinctions that they can make divisions in their academic thought. Lumpers lump everything together. They find different versions of things that throw them together. The Anglicans are lumpers.
Okay.
Basically, they want to walk together, and the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church is essentially a way for liberals and conservatives to live together and still call themselves Anglicans. And if you read the documents, that's still what they're trying to do. The problem is they're running up against the fact that the growing portions of the Anglican Church tend to be in the emerging world, tend to be in places like Africa and Asia, and these are inherently more patriarchal and more conservative.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they're dealing with. So you've got the group called GAFCON, led by a Ugandan bishop, Bishop Mbanda, who's very, very unhappy that they now have a female head of the church, and also the issues around sexuality she was part of.
And now, there's a lot to process there. But even, look, I have to go back a fair amount to remember a time people were as upset as they are about having a female Archbishop of Canterbury. I think a female Doctor Who was one of those moments as well. People lost their minds over this. You can't have a female Doctor Who. Next, to be having a female James Bond. Well, hey, just hold that thought for a moment, because we might do that. This is a huge issue, not just within the Anglican Church, but from the church more broadly, about females in leadership. But there's a difference between leadership and, the head of the movement, I suppose. That gives a stronger message of inclusion. And perhaps no surprise that conservative members, even if they are clumpers, are going to be unhappy with this. Difficult to read this any other way than the West saying, we get to make the rules. Yep. This is the way the church is going. If you don't like it, then clump off. Honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And no, that's exactly right, Andrew. And this is a division between older cultures, in the sense that they're still looking at the world through older lenses. We've modernized, and so we see the world a little bit differently. And this is going to boil down to interpretation of Scripture. And in fairness, when you read the Anglican documents, that's what they're saying, is that we don't agree on how to read Scripture. We both think we're faithfully interpreting Scripture, and some of us think that the church is an inclusive organization, and some of us think it's an exclusive organization. And to me, I don't know how we're going to settle this one easily, because this has to do with even how we conceive what a human being is. In the modern West, you and I are conceived to be isolated individuals who get to decide for ourselves who and what we are. In other parts of the world with more traditional views, they would say, no, you're part of a larger, wider circle of life. It is the largest interpreter of who and what you are. And so we have very divergent views on what an actual human being is. And that, to me, is the biggest lens through which we can see the theological disputes, because we're reading the Bible that way. So you have African bishops who have a more patriarchal view of the universe, and you've got Western bishops with an individualist view of the universe. And you have to decide what a Scripture point to. Where do I stand on this personally? Look, I'm an equalist. I think that God calls people, whether they're male or female. Now, I'm not going to decide whether he calls 80% men and 20% women. None of my business. I'll let God be God.
Yeah.
But my view of it is that ministry is about calling. So I don't see the leader of the Anglican Church as being disqualified because she's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
If she has God's grace and God's calling on her life, then there's no reason that that gift shouldn't be recognized by the church. Okay. So I'm an equals in that sense. I wouldn't fit well in a Ugandan church probably.
Yeah.
But I hope I'm not arriving at that on secular grounds. In other words, I hope it's not my modern worldview growing up in Australia or New Zealand that gives me that. I hope I actually think Scripture actually gives me that.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the real problems lie. These people do not read the Bible the same way. And when you carefully read the Anglican documents, they tell you Scripture is only one source of information for them. Reason, tradition, and experience are the other three, sometimes called the Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Yeah.
But what you'll find with the liberal Christians is that reason and experience tend to dominate over Scripture and tradition. The conservatives will go with Scripture and tradition. So that boils it down.
With the Anglican structure, I mean, as you mentioned beforehand, the southern churches, the developing nation churches, these places are thriving, whereas a lot of the big churches in the Western world, they're more museums than they are functioning congregations in some cases.
Yep.
Is this, I don't have a thorough understanding of the Anglican system. Would it be the case that the Africans have the numbers, or the conservative emerging churches have the numbers here, that this decision could be overturned?
Not the political clout, but they have the numbers. And I think you'll see the same with the Catholic Church. It's still the Europeans and co that really rule there. But in fact, the growing parts of the church are more conservative than the parts that are dying. I mean, the Gospel Coalition says of the new Archbishop of Canterbury that this continues the Anglican Church's slide into irrelevance. Now, there's a case to be made there, because what we're seeing with young people across the Western world is they're actually growing more sexually conservative.
Yeah.
At the time that the church is trying to play catch up with the world on becoming sexually more liberal. And so my own view is that there is going to be a divergence. Whether the Anglican, well, we've said this for years, haven't we, whether the Anglican Church can hold itself together. And I guess they've been saying it since Henry's time that you brought up right at the beginning.
Yep.
And they have managed to pull it off. But whether that will continue, I'll be surprised.
And already there are different expressions of Anglicanism, I suppose, and there is the opportunity for people to go to perhaps more traditional or more liberal Anglican churches, even here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and some people choose to do that. The Anglicans, they'll keep lumping it together. Do you think this isn't going to cause another reformation, another schism, another rift? Craig, what's your thoughts?
I think it's another brick in the wall, and I think inevitably there is going to be a more hardcore split. But at the moment, perhaps it'll keep things going for a while. But I just think they're diverging in such a way that it would be hard to reconcile the differences. That the churches in Africa and Asia are getting more conservative, and the churches in the West are getting more liberal in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases. But having said that, there is a new generation entering the church. You and I have talked about it before. They say there are 2 million more young people under 24-year-olds in churches in the UK than there were even a decade ago. Many of those will be in Anglican churches, because there's a strong Anglican church planting movement in England, regeneration of old churches.
Yep.
Holy Trinity Brompton's at the core of that. And who knows? I mean, there may be a reinvigoration, and maybe some of these decisions will be revisited. I do think, though, we need to be really cautious here. If the reason for excluding this person from leadership of the Anglican Church is that she's a woman, I do think that is incredibly narrow-minded. And it's us in a position of God, of saying God couldn't call a woman to do something, when in the Bible it clearly does. Let's take Deborah as our role model, and there are many others. At one point the church believes there was only one member of the church, and it was Mary. So let's have a little grace here.
Exactly. Although to be fair, it's not just that the new Archbishop is a woman, but she's a woman who has known liberal views on sexuality. Having said that, if she was a conservative, then she might exclude herself from leadership anyway. So that's a little bit of a catch-22 in that regard. Craig, an interesting dilemma faced by the Anglican Church, still the second largest denomination in the world. Thanks so much for your thoughts, your comments, your insight on this. Thanks for joining us today.
Bless you, mate. Great to see you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.